Welcome to Event Marketing Redefined. Thank you for spending time with us today. As always, we greatly appreciate it. Today, I have Nicola Kastner with us today. And interesting conversation today. And I wonder where it will wander, right? She is somebody that used to run global events for SAP. And we will talk a little bit about that. But I think really where this conversation will go will be portfolio planning, will be event strategy. And that is her role right now in her consulting firm, where she comes in, helps you build your portfolio out and helps you execute strategy for high level events. So Nicola, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So introduce yourself a little bit here. Tell us about, just briefly, about SAP, running global events there. Would love to hear the beginning of that.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. Nicola Kastner. I am Toronto-based, so I don't know if we have anyone from Toronto on the line here with us, but man, it's hot up here. So if I start sweating, it's because we've got summer back completely. I started my consulting practice about 18 months ago after spending 5.5 years with SAP. I originally joined on the Ariba team, which Ariba was an acquisition of SAP's. We were a separate standalone marketing team, and I ran global events for them for about 1.5 years, and then moved over to global marketing, where I led global event marketing strategy, which really was focused on taking our portfolio of events, of legacy events, a lot of acquisition events, and really looking at what we did, how we did it, why we did it, and really focused on driving outcomes for both the customer and the attendee at our events, but also, most importantly, bottom line for the business.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about the transition, or this kind of either aha moment, or where you were like, hey, I need to go open up my own firm and I need to take this approach that you have. Was there any aha moment? How did you transition? Why did you transition?
Yeah, so I'd done it once. I actually had consulted previously before joining SAP, so I knew that there was a market out there for my services. But, working at SAP, global marketing was a 3,500 person company. So it's a big organization. SAP is a huge organization. And so the fact that marketing was 3,500 people alone, that created a lot of opportunity as my former colleagues and peers and so forth left the organization to become chief marketing officers at smaller tech firms. And, now they were responsible for the entire event budgets, the entire marketing budget, as well as events, just as we were coming out of COVID. And people didn't know what to do. Should we go back to what we always did? And it was a perfect opportunity to reevaluate the portfolio of events for these people that were in new roles, really for everybody, quite frankly. And it just became an easy decision, and I haven't looked back.
Very cool. So describe the kind of usual way of picking events one by one, right? And what the problem with that is.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we've all heard.
Yeah, I know you're
always been there. We have to go there. So we've got the execuim, we've got the always done it. And those are probably two of the main ways that events get picked, or a very loud sales team that are demanding presence. And in some cases that works, but some cases it doesn't. It's really about making sure that you're using events in the right way, because they are not the answer to everything. And when they are the right answer, you're optimizing both the choice of events and then the way that you activate those events to drive outcomes. So, it's real for portfolio planning is really about thinking about, the who and the why, and then the how.
I love a couple of things that you said there that I want to jump into. So one is the have to always done. I find this fascinating. If anybody listens to me or he reads my babbles on LinkedIn, I essentially say all the time, having done this for 12 years with trade shows, one of the main questions that we ask anybody who comes to us or that we engage with about their trade shows and events, we always say, why are you going to this event or these series of events? And the answer so often is, I don't know. We've always gone. We have to support the association, and there's really no purpose. There's no intention. There's no real why behind it. So I think you saying that when it comes to portfolio planning for kind of the long haul is huge problem in the industry. And I wonder, what are your thoughts? Where does that stem from? Is it just a person in the seat who's under-resourced, doesn't have direction from stakeholders? Is it a company issue? Where do you think that comes from?
I think it could be a lot of things. And I don't think that there's one answer. I think it's, Many event professionals maybe don't feel like they have a voice and can ask these things and can question the
Yeah.
why. Maybe they don't know to question the why. And that's always the first question I'll ask. Why are we doing this? What is success? How do we know we've been successful at the end? And those are really, really important questions. In some cases, it might be that your organization doesn't want to listen, and that's a whole different challenge, quite frankly. But there are ways around that as well, about using your data, using benchmarking as what other companies are doing to tell your story and help really earn the seat at the table to talk about the why and question the why.
So we have a question from Kimberly. Kimberly, thank you so much for asking a question. It's my favorite part of the show when we do it. First thing, before I lose my train of thought, because I will lose my train of thought, is the whole stakeholder thing. So as an event manager, event marketer, whatever the title may be that people have, they could be associate marketers. It doesn't matter. They get thrown in the fire. But I always encourage people, and I could be wrong because I'm not in these seats. So I'm saying things that maybe is not perfect, but I would, as a person who owns and runs a business, when people in my company are asking questions and asking smart questions, I'm like, that is the right person for this place. So I always encourage, and I could be wrong, but if you're in that seat and you don't know why, and you don't know the purpose, and you don't know to what you just said, like the who, the why, the what, like all the W's of what you're doing, go ask, go start poking and prying. And if someone pushes back, say, hey, not trying to ruffle feathers. I just want to know what we're doing so I can drive a result that matters. I think it's a simple way of operating.
I couldn't agree more. And you're asking the question for the right reason, right? You're asking the question to drive outcomes, not to be difficult. Yes. And I think when it's framed up that way, people will respect it. People will listen.
So imagine if you're talking to your CMO or, your VP of marketing or your director of sales, whoever you have the access to, saying, hey, I want us to go to these events and trade shows to go drive a result, a business outcome, pipeline impact, you name it. You tell me, you're in charge. I want to know what you want to accomplish that's going to make this department look good, be worth our spend. You start asking questions like that, people start to recognize and say, hey, this person is someone to watch for because they get it. They're not just doing their job just to do it. They're seeking an outcome, which I think is really, really sharp.
I always say you have to start with the end in mind, right? And it's just going to make you more successful. If you don't know what success is, how can you even put a plan in place to achieve it?
I agree. I really agree. All right. Question from Kimberly. Kimberly, thank you for the question. It is, do you currently do CBD events and THC events now that this is becoming such a huge deal? And how do these trade shows get set up in a legal way?
I do not. I have not. I'm not all, and it's not any reason. It's not by choice. It's just sort of where my network has landed. Every single one of my clients is a tech client, and they're B2B events versus maybe B2C, or they're not in that business. So no, unfortunately, Kimberly, sorry, I cannot answer that.
Yeah, Kimberly, my thoughts, if anybody wants to jump in the chat and here has experience with it, please do. My thoughts to answer your question are pretty simple. I think there are, the legality of it, I don't fully understand. I do know that the reins on this have been loosened drastically, and the industry is becoming more prominent, more regular, more normal. How these events get set up in a legal way, that I don't know. I do know that they happen from my standpoint, right? As a, trade show and event production company, we treat them any other way that we treat anything else, right? What's your why? Who's your customer? What are you there for? What are, beginning with the end in mind? What are you trying to accomplish? And, we operate the same way as we would do with any other event. But in terms of the legalities, I don't know. Also, if we haven't answered your question, you want to ask a different way, feel free. Absolutely. You can throw it back in there. But thank you. Thank you for the question. We really appreciate it. So Nicola, what is portfolio planning? If I said, what is portfolio planning? How would you respond to that?
So first, I'm going to focus on events specifically, obviously, because it's what we're here to discuss. But you have to remember that events are part of something bigger. I reside in marketing. I'm a marketer. And an event is really one touch point along a customer journey And we often get really stuck when we're talking about measurements and outcomes on attribution, first touch, last touch, who gets credit for the customer,
Yeah.
and or the customer converting to a sale, whatever the metric might be. And I think that's kind of ludicrous, first of all, because that's like saying you decided to marry your spouse 30 days after one particular dinner, and it was only that one dinner. There was no emotion involved, and it was one dinner. We know that that's not how life works. So you have to think about events as a bit part of a customer journey and part of a campaign. Every touch point works together, and the messaging needs to be the same and aligned across those touch points, or else it just becomes chaos for the customer across their journey. So I just wanted to preface that before I talk about events. And to your question, what is event portfolio planning? It is really about understanding the needs of the organization, the needs of the customer base or the attendee base throughout their life cycle. Because when you're talking about, a net new prospect versus an existing customer that's got millions of dollars of business with you, their needs are two different things. It's about understanding those two things and finding the right balance, and then designing a portfolio to meet those needs. So if your organization says, I need to build a portfolio of events that's going to fill the funnel with new opportunities, with new contacts, with new names, you're going to focus much more on third-party events, trade shows, whatever terminology you want to use, versus building a customer conference. Because that is nobody's getting on an airplane to attend your customer conference if they don't already know you, right? So it's really about understanding the what do you need to achieve, and then what are the right events type, and then what are the specific events within that type that you include in the portfolio.
Got it. Now, that's a good rundown. I think, funny enough, it is fairly simple, right? I think sometimes people are just not taking the time to go through the motions of sitting, we said, with stakeholders and saying, hey, like, what are the needs of the organization, right?
Yeah.
And that's the first thing you touched on. What are our initiatives, right? What are our goals? Is it a revenue goal? Is it a leads goal? Is it are there activities we're trying to accelerate to create things that work down the line? Like, what is it? And then I think the thing that people miss all the time is the needs of the audience. Too many people are showing up to exhibit or do an event the way that they want, the way that they feel their product or service represents, when really it's about the audience, as you were mentioning. And then I love what you're saying around taking those two things and then saying, hey, look, like, if it doesn't line up with these two, we don't need to be at these events. What are we doing there? Because that's the question, right?
Yep.
It's like, what are we doing there?
Yep, exactly. Exactly. And it's, you can have multiple competing priorities, right? So you've got the entire customer life cycle. So that's one. You go to market across different geographies. You go to market across different personas, across different industries. So all of those things are important to understand, and the prioritization of them as well. And I always say to my customers, focus on two. You can't really focus well on any more than two of those things. Pick two. And so if you want to focus on early stage awareness in X specific industries, focus there. That's very clear and helps you really build the right portfolio of events.
Do you think that trying to dial it in and niche it down as much as possible and be specific is an advantage to companies when they're planning?
I think so, but it all depends on the organization, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they, have really broad aspirations, and then it becomes about finding out, like, where can, let me take a step back. As event professionals and as marketers, we need to focus on where we can drive impact. We can change organizations. We can ask the right questions, but we can't drive impact across every area of the business. So it's really about focusing and figuring out where can you make them that most impact.
We had an interesting conversation prior coming on, which I kind of want to turn this back to and get to. But tell me, with your practice, with what you do with your clients, was there like a light bulb moment? Was there anything specifically that, like, you did, an outcome was created, or things just went the right way where you were like, man, this is really working. Like, this is great.
Yeah. And I'll give you one really concrete example. And it was from when I was consulting before. We were at an event that was a partner event, because certainly in the tech world, and I think in many other industries as well, we have, partners that they've sponsored our event, we're expected to sponsor their event as well. And so this particular event, we had a 10 by 10 little booth that we were exhibiting at. And normally I wouldn't have wanted to go. That wasn't an event that warranted my presence at. It wasn't a really big activation where I had a lot of executives and so forth. But this particular event, I'd missed my flight sitting at the hotel bar. Or the airport bar. Missed my flight. Yeah. So it gives you an idea of what I was doing. But anyway, so I ended up going back to the trade show, and I was sitting in the booth, and I watched this customer come up and talk to one of our people that were working our booth, the staff, and we'll talk about staffing in a second, working the booth. And he said, yeah, I'll have so-and-so follow up with you. That's great. Didn't take a note. Next person came up, next person came up, next person came up. That person that he had said, we're going to have follow up with you, was long gone, long forgotten. And I was like, well, this kind of defeats the object of why we're here. And especially if you promised an outcome to this person. So I spoke with the person, he was a sales engineer. And I said, is it always like this? He said, oh, it's so difficult to have a conversation. We're so busy. And I said, well, that's really interesting. So we created a whole different staffing plan. I wasn't savvy enough in the technology to be able to understand what was important in a conversation or not. I would have been like, what do you want me to put in the notes? But we created staffing plans where we matched the sales engineers with inside sales reps. And they worked in teams. They were incentivized as teams to have meaningful conversations. Meaningful conversation meant a conversation. Not a lead. It didn't have to be a lead, but it's a happy customer. And to document that conversation, we took all of the BANT type questions, all of those complex forms that we have people fill in on the scanners, and just to document the conversation. We had a 386% increase in direct opportunities that were created out of the next event because of that staffing model. So to me, that was just like this one aha moment was so pivotal in the way that actually still to this day that I approach a third-party event.
I really like that because I always find myself when I get into these conversations, I think the high level broad stroke, like, hey, know your why, know your audience, do this is great. And I think it's so pivotal and people don't do it. But as you go down the funnel more, the details matter. And what's interesting is I did an interview. It was Nancy Toohill. She's with LexisNexis. She's their global event marketer. And we're having a conversation. And she was saying to me, I thought it was so cool what she said. She was like, doing events the right way is so hard and it's a lot of work. So it's these details of like when you're in the booth, do you have a plan for qualifying? Do you have a plan for following up? Do you have you're doing all this work, spending all this money to be there. Let's say you did your portfolio planning, you did all this stuff and you're at the right places. You could just go screw it up. Most people would because they don't have a way of tracking leads. They don't know how to qualify. They don't know how to follow up. Gets lost in the shuffle. It's amazing. The details matter. And there's so much work to be done to execute leads at a high level. I love that story.
Yeah, or staff aren't engaging. How many times have you been to events that you walk around and they're talking to each other, not trying to engage with people that are walking into the booth? I mean, that's my biggest pet peeve to this day. But yeah, so you're right. Any piece of the process can mess up. But that's why I always say start with your outcomes, because then it'll allow you to design the plan to drive the right outcomes.
You know what I've learned about what you just said, because I walked more show floors years ago than I have now. But when I noticed that for always, frustrated me. You have the people reaching out in the aisles to get traffic. Hey, do you need, and it just becomes this weird market, right? But what I've learned now is the companies that they don't have the traffic, they don't have the meetings, they don't have the engagement, they're sitting on their phone, they're eating lunch out in the thing. They just look disorganized and sloppy. They didn't put the work in. Right. They didn't put the work in prior to drive the traffic, to get their customers there, to create engagement, they didn't put the work in. It's a lot of work to get there to have that. And when we've prepared like that, you have this sense of feeling like you have to be ready. Like, oh my God, I put all this work in. Now, if people show up, I got to be ready for them. I can't, be on my phone or sit around and I learned
if you build it, they will come is not true.
Yes, that is funny. I used to say that sometimes, and I think I misinterpreted what it actually means. And I think saying something like that should really endeavor more of like those details. Like, have you put the work in? Do you have the intention? Do you have purpose, strategy? Then if you build all that, all of it, yes, you got to hope people would show up.
Yep.
Talk about your process. I think that'll be interesting for a lot of people here. If we have event managers, trade show managers on this, is outline some of the steps that you take people through, right? Like when you first come in the door and someone's looking for portfolio planning, event strategy, where do you start?
Well, normally they come with a specific need. So I'm going to ask you a question before I answer that question, because I can take it one of two ways. Where do I start in building? Let's say we're talking about building a portfolio plan, or are we talking about activating at a specific event that you've decided to go to? Because I can answer it two ways.
Let's do portfolio planning like from the beginning, because that's kind of where we wanted to start, right? I think we'll get to the event side when we get to a single event or something like that. Let's do portfolio planning.
So first of all, it's those conversations up front about priorities. What's success look like? What are we trying to achieve? What are our target industries, our target personas? Who are we going after? And what do we expect to come out of it? Those are the first things. And like I said, often it's kind of a complex landscape, and you really need to simplify to say, okay, what are the three things that I need to focus on? If I'm building a portfolio of events, let's just say for a hypothetical company that sells HR tech, right? Am I building a portfolio for North America? Am I building a portfolio for the world? Am I building a portfolio for industry specific events? Am I going after HR as a generalist? Those are a lot of it. Those are the types of questions you ask. So you can narrow down what your focus is. So let's say it's been decided that we're going to focus on HR audiences. We're going to look at tech events, and we're going to look at North America. Let's just say that's the list. The next question I would ask is, are there any partner events that we need to be at that these audiences will be at? That's one. That's an important question, and it's a question that's burnt me in the past that I haven't asked. And then all of a sudden it's on my list, and because I've maybe evaluated it, and it's not the right event that we should be at for the right mix, but it has to then get worked in to the portfolio.
Yes.
The other thing is, and we're assuming that we're focusing on collecting new names, new contacts, but also accelerating existing business. Because we'll come to that for a second, because third-party events are really good for that as well. They're not just top of funnel events. Most people think they are. And so then what I do is I create an evaluation criteria. What am I evaluating the events on? What are the merits? Am I looking at number of attendees? How many of them are relevant to me? Because how many sponsors are there? My biggest pet peeve is, we've got a 5,000 person event, and they've got 4,000 sponsors that are there, and there's only a 1,000 customers or potential customers. And I'm only selling to large enterprise, and most of them are from companies that are small enterprise. My pool of people has narrowed down, right? So what are the criteria I'm evaluating on? I often look.
Do you have a ratio there? Like, do you have a ratio for sponsors, attendees, exhibitors, like in that space? Because I think people do use the metrics that they try to bludgeon out of the shows to get as much information as they can. Do you have any ratio or like numbers that, like an example that would look good or be appealing?
It's all over the map, but I would suggest that you should not be really anywhere that more than 30% are sponsors.
Yeah. I was going to say 25, but it's yes.
As a general rule of thumb, right? And I'll often do, because sometimes they won't tell you, is I will look at how many packages, and we'll get to the sponsorship prospectus because it's important, but I'll look at the sponsorship prospectus to see how many packages at each level are they selling, how many sponsor tickets are included in those packages, and I'll create that calculation myself.
That's great. I love that.
So what and actually the sponsorship prospectus is the most important thing. Get that and build a spreadsheet where you're looking at the number of attendees, the number of relevant attendees. So, if you're to that example of large enterprise, if you're selling to large enterprise, how many of them are that? And if it's not included in the sponsorship prospectus, they want your business. You can ask these questions. You need to hold exhibit organizers responsible and accountable for giving you this information. I look at sponsor ratio to attendees. I usually create a mix for that. I look at price, obviously, and I look at price per relevant attendee. I look at what is included in my package and what are the additional opportunities for thought leadership. I will always tell my clients, don't ever go to an event where you are just exhibiting and you don't have opportunities to drive thought leadership or content or something in addition. It's usually those won't make my list. And so once you've established this criteria and what's more important, right? So you weight these things. So maybe your number of relevant attendees is the most important thing. So that's worth 20% of your score. Maybe the price is the most important. Maybe that's 50%. Who knows, right? It all depends on your specific needs. But I create this rating criteria up front. So then I'm able to evaluate all of these different events objectively.
Yeah, I love that rundown there with the ratios and the things because what's funny is we get so many general questions about it. They're general. People are like, hey, like, how do I know what to sponsor? And, typically we'll say, hey, send over the information, right? The rundown of all the sponsorships available. And sometimes the conversation we've gotten into with our clients, we don't go into the depth that you're going into there, right? Which is why you do what you do. We do what we do. And I have always said to people, like, why is your customer there? Why are they there? Because they're not there to see you. They don't mind seeing you. But why are they there? Can you understand why they're there? To me, I am then looking at those sponsorships thinking like, how can I meaningfully meet them at one of those junctures, And then I'm like a huge advertising, like old school type fan of things. So I'm always like, can I get a huge graphic and do something like outlandish that someone's like, wow, look at that graphic or something that would be fun. But that's how we've explained it to our clients at times is like, how can you meet them in a meaningful way? Just having a sign on the stair, is that really going to do it? Or are you going to, which one would suit your clients best? I think is the best way that we've looked at it at times.
Absolutely.
How can event marketer pick the right mix of events, right? When they're looking at all of them and they have this data in front, say they're working with you and you're suggesting like, where is there anything intuition wise or telling signs? Like, how do they pick that right mix?
Across the customer lifecycle, you mean?
Yeah.
It really depends on the organization, but traditionally, from an event perspective, I recommend probably 60% of budget in later funnels. So from decision onwards through loyalty, through advocacy, those are really where you can make an impact from an event perspective. And a lot of those events become your user conferences and your own proprietary events. And then 40% on the front end, but that depends. That's for a more mature company. If you're a newer company that doesn't have as large of a customer base, maybe you switch the ratio and it's 60-40. But like I said, the later stages of the customer life cycle don't discount third-party events or trade shows because those are really important in that mix as well. So, and that's where really targeted meetings come in, right? You can use these events to meet with your existing customers or current opportunities, really target them in advance because that they're going to be at those events because, not everybody's going to come to yours.
I think that's such a good point for third party is, I'm constantly in a discussion about at these trade shows, how do you show the worth of the program, ROI, measurement, stuff like that? And I always say, I use the term pipeline impact. I'm like, you should be showing pipeline impact because oftentimes that is the goal. And I say all the time, like, net new leads, net new pipeline, new sales. Great. That's easy. Everybody knows that you have to find a way to track that. But sometimes I think the things people don't think about is like stage cycle acceleration. Do you have somebody in your pipeline and during these 3-4 events a year, you have quicker acceleration? The other one to what you were saying is your customers. Are you increasing what your customers are spending? Are you reactivating an old account because of a dinner, because of an interaction, because of whatever it may be? there's so much other stuff, website traffic, conversions on the site, referral partnerships. These are all things to me that if you're trying to show the worth of your program, you have to be trying to showcase, because it's not just, oh, we had 180 leads, we had this many meetings. That's the basics. Honestly, there's so many other things that go into the touch points, and the customers, your current, is a big one.
Yeah. And you have to plan for those things, right? Those don't happen
Yeah.
by accident. You have to plan, you have to have an outreach campaign. If you're creating a meetings program, you need to make sure you're staffed for the meetings program. There's a lot of extra, there's to your point earlier, there's all the work to make it happen. And so that's really about trying to understand who's there and the why.
We touched on host events, user conferences, right? These idea of not being third party at a conference, trade show with an organizer. How do you know when to host your own event? How do you know when maybe you should be spinning this idea and throwing it out there saying, hey, why don't we start thinking about doing this?
Well, and that's an easy and a difficult question to answer, because there's no exact metric, but you need to have a critical mass of customers in a geography too, right? Because, let's just say you're a European-based company and you have a well-established customer base there, and you decide you want to host a customer conference in the US. Believe me, not many of them are getting on an airplane and coming to your user conference across geographies. So to me, I often recommend you look at your customer base within a specific geography. In North America, we will travel to wherever. We don't, it's normal for us to travel to a central location. In Asia Pacific or Latin America, completely different. You need to look at Brazil as a country, Mexico as a country, Japan as a country. They don't cross boundaries and countries. So understanding your geography is one of them. And then, do you have that critical mass? Because while an event is a really amazing way to bring your brand to life, to deepen the relationships with your customers, to accelerate pipeline and create new pipeline, there has to be value in it for the attendee. And, I think the average is 4.2 events per year or something, the average tech person will go to. How do you make sure that it's one of yours? How do you know they're going to come to yours? So really having that critical mass is important, because I don't think at any point you're ever going to reach more than 20% of your customer base at an event. So if you need to have 2,000 customers, you need to have enough customers that are actually even implemented with your technology and using your technology or your tools or your product, whatever it might be, before they're going to come to an event. So you sort of just have to work through that mix. I've had many a client that have said, I want to create a user conference for my customers. And I've told them that they're not big enough yet. They need to take the event to the people versus the other way around.
Because the idea, the fact that you're going to invite X amount of people, you're only going to get a certain amount to engage. So you have to have that bulk that's there. What's your take on some of the more, I would call it like guerrilla marketing style, smaller, intimate events? A lot of people are doing offsite dinners, turning it into just a dinner, right? So an event, you could say, rather than having a big user conference or host event, you're just regionally going around and you're throwing these maybe engagements on this smaller side. Do you have any experience with those? What are your thoughts there for people kind of, who want to start small?
Those I've seen them be very successful. I've seen them also they've become a bit crazy and overwhelming, because often those type of things become sales activities. So I think one of the first things to identify is what's a sales activity versus what's an event. I work with many clients to establish that definition up front. Even in my own organization, when I was at SAP, we used to have that conversation all the time, because then it's clear what, where events or where marketing should be involved. Obviously meeting people where people are is always preferable than trying to expect them to come to you. You just have to, with dinner type activities or activations, you have to be clear once again on the outcomes. What are you trying to achieve? What is success? Because those can become a little grayer, becomes entertainment, right? Versus business development or so forth. But they can work. I also think it's really, you can create your own event around a third party event.
That's just going to ask you about that.
Yeah, I think
there's a danger there for events, right? For the third party, because that's what people are doing. They're getting creative where they're saying, hey, I'm not going to pay you $90,000 for concrete. And then I'm not going to give you another 40 to sponsor and then another 180 to build a booth. And then my survey, I'm not going to be out $500,000 here. Yeah. But what I will do is I'll show up in Nashville during your third party event. I'll throw a dinner, I'll throw a party, I'll market it, because I'm not using the association to do marketing because you won't give me the data. So I think there's a little bit of a thing going on here, trend. And I think it makes sense because people are just saying, hey, I want to meaningfully engage my customer where they are in the process of what they're doing. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but.
Yeah, it's a fine line, and it's, can become an ethical fine line as well. I certainly wouldn't recommend it if it's a partner organization and you've declined to sponsor their event, but you're then doing these guerrilla activities. That probably would get you in a lot of hot water, I would think. But
people brag. I've seen people brag about it. I've seen companies on LinkedIn brag that basically says, like, we threw the best party at X, but we didn't sponsor exhibit. This is what that's what I've seen.
Oh yeah. I had the same thing happen at SAP. We had a competitor buy all of the taxi toppers. And so people were coming to our event in their branded taxis and taxi toppers. And they were all over it on social media. What we do. I mean, there's not much that you can do, but I think certainly you can add on to an event. So if your attendance is going to be in town, like your target audience is going to be in town, let's use Mobile World Congress, huge event that happens in Barcelona every year. It's a big tech event. You could do a pre-event, you could do a pre-day because you already have the people there. I don't always recommend doing post because people are tired and they're
trying to get out. Yeah.
Yeah. If you can get them pre and you can get them early enough that they haven't booked their travel, that can be incredibly successful. You can do half-day seminars. The challenge is you have to be very careful and you really have to understand your clients. And because, I go to a conference, I'm going to a conference to attend the sessions and participate in the content of the conference, not to go to somebody else's event. So there's a bit of a fine line, but it can be incredibly successful.
I kind of like mixing, like we recommend to our clients all the time. Obviously, we want them to go to the third party, right? I mean, they need what we do, but we recommend to them to then put those guerrilla marketing tactics in play, like heavily. We push it on them, right? But do you think that people that are now going this route where they don't sponsor, they don't exhibit, but they go to the city, they go to the location and they do all this stuff. Do you think, to me, it feels like a little bit of a kick in the ass and a wake up call to the organizers saying, hey, you need to drive as much value because apparently you're not driving enough value for the money that's being charged. Do you think it's maybe a little bit of a wake up call for them? There's a lot of fighting for data. There's a lot of fighting for the value being driven, for the money that's being spent.
Yeah, I do. I hope it's a wake-up call, right? I often counsel my clients on making sure, there's sort of this three-way trifecta. If you think, really, when you think about it, it's the value for the organization, your company, so you're running an event, the value for your attendee, and the value for the sponsor. And the sweet spot where all three of those overlap is the value in the event, but it's hard to get there. So you really need to think about if you're looking, if you're designing an event, sponsorship prospectus is about driving the right value and the right opportunities. Yep. And to your point about the data, that becomes a challenge because with GDPR and all of these requirements, less and less data is becoming available, which is why you're at these events in the first place. If I don't have any data on people, what's the point, right? So it's a hard balance. I think the industry has a long way to go to evolve. I think we came back like we were in 2019, and I was really hoping we'd have a reinvention of the model, and I'm hoping it will start. And I don't know what the answer is. I think we got to get a lot of brilliant minds together to figure it out. But I hope there is becoming a focus on this because we're seeing partner attendance way up, sponsor attendance way up, and attendee customer attendance down, and that's a bad mix.
Yeah. It is. We have another question from Kimberly, but I think it's along the same line. So Kimberly, see if we can help you out more here. It says, how do you promote an event that goes beyond your business ethics? So for me, and I'll let Nicola get to this as well, but for me, Kimberly, it's pretty simple. I think that, you can always take a stance that it's a bit, it's an industry you don't want to work in. That's your choice. That's obviously a financial decision, whether you're employed or whether you are self-employed. That is one that you are, that is your right to make, that you don't want to work in a certain industry. I have had people who work for me that tell me that they don't want to do SHOT Show. They don't want to do certain shows. And I'm like, hey, that's your right. Like that's fine. The other side of it is, if you don't have a choice, or maybe you're not willing to take that deep of a stance, is I would treat it like you treat anything else. Right. So if you have a process that you go through to promote an event, I would go through the same motions, and it might be a little more difficult, but that would be my take on it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I have much more to add than that, other than put yourself in the attendees' shoes as much as you can. Do
Yep.
your research about who that person is and what matters to them. And that actually applies to almost anything anyway.
All right. So let's go into this next piece, which I love talking about, which is like funnel. Because everybody's looking for pipeline. Everybody's looking for leads, when they go to these events and these relationships. So tell me a little bit about selecting events or navigating events or ways of looking at events based on top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, any sort of philosophy that you have there or way of looking at things that you consult companies on.
Yeah, I guess so. And I mean, I don't know that it's much different than what I've already said per se, but I think when you're looking at, say, top of funnel, it's about driving qualified names, qualified leads. A scan of somebody in the beer line is not a qualified name or lead. It's just garbage in, garbage out, right? So I think when you're selecting events to fill the funnel, you to our point that we've made earlier, you need to activate around it appropriately to drive the right people, because that's just a wasted lead. And I've seen people scanning in the beer line, and it drives me absolutely insane. So I think you just need to, I don't think it's any different than what I've said. I just think you need to think about who's there and why, and how you best activate on it. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think you are. I think one of my thoughts on it would be that you don't have to have a set one, right? You can do multiple at all shows. Like I had an example recently, I think it was like a year or two ago, we had a customer of ours that once we got discussing with them and designing this booth, and this conversation came up where they just eked it out. They like didn't give it to us, but it slipped out. And they were like, it was two people on a call from the company, and they weren't arguing with each other, but one slipped and said something to the other. And they were like, well, what about all the customers that come up? They're always asking us and I was on the call, and I was like, well, wait, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? And they were like, well, we get a lot of customers that use our software that are at this show, and they come up and they want us to help them troubleshoot, help them do this. And, and I was like, whoa. I'm like, guys, like, we need to build a space for this. How many customers are you talking about? Because they're so focused on top funnel and getting new. I'm like, if you got 30 people coming up to you over 3-4 days that are already using your product, why wouldn't you have like a designated area in the back that you're like, hey, good seeing you again. Let's roll back. I have Jeff. He's our tech. He'll roll you through some stuff and let's figure it out. We ended up doing that for them. But I think
model from
that's the idea.
Right?
Yeah.
Think the Apple Store, right? You're selling product
exactly.
and helping people at the expert bar. So I 100% agree. It costs a lot more money to get a new customer than keep your old ones. You got to keep them happy, right? Especially in, I'm come from the tech world, in the world of cloud technology, where people can switch. You have to keep your customers happy.
I think a lot of what you do with the portfolio planning and the strategy and the upfront, I'm a big believer in the fact that if you put the work in upfront and then you go into these events and you start executing, it then allows you to make the proper adjustments. Whereas if you don't put the work in on the front, you don't really know the adjustments to make. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, have you made adjustments with clients because, okay, they are doing the right things? You don't bat 1,000. You don't always hit it right where everything's perfect. So how do you feel like that allows you to make adjustments and navigate? And do you have any advice for event marketers that are in the middle of their season or things that they're doing where they can make adjustments that are effective?
Yeah, I think understanding what is working and what is not can be difficult. Like using that example I was talking about with this 10 by 10 booth where we put this new staffing strategy in place. If I hadn't been there and seen it with my own eyes, we would have never made that adjustment. And we'd done all the work up front. We thought we'd covered everything. So I think being present is critical at these events. Working the booth. I always work that check-in, that hospitality desk, whatever you want to call it, at the front. I am always on the booth because the questions that people ask, that both the staff and the people that are coming to your booth to visit you, are so important, and you can learn so much from them. I think looking daily at your lead and your lead counts or your comments, whatever it might be in the scanners, is really important, because you can see if, one demo pod, let's just call it that somebody hasn't scanned one single person. You've got multiple days maybe to fix it if you've caught it early enough. If you've haven't caught it at all, then you have no way to adjust. Maybe their scanner's not working, but there could be lots of reasons. So looking at your data daily is also important, but just being there, I think, is the best way to learn to see, and then you can make those tweaks much easier.
I know I mentioned earlier, but I was talking with Nancy too, and she was saying that they developed a scorecard, and this scorecard goes to every event. And it really is this like subjective but objective scorecard that the person in charge of the event has to fill out. Some of it's subjective. It's like, what did you see? What did you feel? What was happening? Right. And then it's objective. It's like, hey, these are the metrics that we need. And I think that piece of it is the gut. Like, was this good? How were the conversations? Like, you know what I mean? What was going on? What didn't work? What was odd? Where could we improve? And I think that allows you to, to make adjustments on the fly.
Yeah. And also, what was the comp set doing? Right. If your booth is empty and everybody else is busy, why? Right.
What's going on over there? Yeah.
What's your, is your message resonating? You can do surveys. You can actually do in-person surveys with people. You make it worth their while, give them a little incentive and say, hey, can I ask you some questions? How, kind of like the home shoppers, right? Like, how did you enjoy your store visit today? You can do those things as well and learn what's resonating and what's not, and then make the tweaks. But I spend a lot of time for my customers looking at competition and what they're doing, what they're saying, how they're acting.
Tell me a little bit about, I'll call it like areas of strategy that you implement, right, into someone's program once you've selected events. I think this is important because I think it goes back to our conversation earlier about details, right? So you had mentioned one on this about staffing and like working the booth and the way that everything's going on. What are some areas at trade shows and events that you strategically help your customers implement? What do you feel is important and valuable there?
Oh, wow. There's a lot. There's quite a few.
I bet there's a list. Go ahead. Just carve through it.
I would say your outreach strategy. So your pre-event outreach and marketing strategy. How are you going to make the people that you want to talk to? Because often there are target customers or, target accounts that your organization wants to talk to. How are you going to make them aware of your presence? If you're running a meeting program, who are you targeting for meeting? What is that meetings? What is that outreach campaign? Yeah. If you are sponsoring a hospitality event, who do you want there? How do you build that outreach campaign? So that would be one piece of it. To the point of, these VIP activities, it's like, what are the surround activities? Always talk through that, right? Are you doing a party? Are you doing a VIP reception? Are you sponsoring the evening event where you have a private room? What are those surround activities that you can put in place around the event? Also, what is your partner outreach? If you've got other partners there, what's your partner outreach? How are you going, can you drive traffic to each other's booth? Be an area you can focus on. Your PR and analyst strategy as well. Some of these big, large industry events, your analysts are going to be there, and it's going to be critical that and the media that you get in front of them in the right way and create the right messaging. There's your content strategy, of course. There's your engagement strategy. How are you going to get people to interact with your booth? And it's not just about swag. Swag can be important. Swag can be a big driver, but it's not the answer to everything, and you have to be sustainable. And you don't want to be polluting the world with these tchotchkes. I call them, I shouldn't swear, but I call them shiny shit. Like you don't want you got to be smart about that stuff, and how are you going to create the engagement to attract people to your booth that might not already know you, and then all the way through to your lead collection, right? So many companies and the companies that are, providing the scanners at the show, they have these band type questions. Do you have your budget? Do you have decision authority? What's your timing? All those types of questions. That is the most awkward thing to have to ask anybody. And do you have authority to make the decision, Mr.
Do you
Smith?
have decision-making power? Yeah, are you?
Oh, no. Like, so that's the bane of my existence. So how you set up those scanners, how you train your staff are really important in the outcomes. And then there's, now move on to post. There's your lead, your follow-up strategy, your ongoing campaign integration. How do you move people through the funnels? How do you target hot leads? You need to have a way to target hot leads and a process to get them to the top of the bucket of leads or of names as well. So spend a lot of time focusing on those. So I think that's sort of all of them. But
no, those are excellent. And I think it kind of, I don't want to say rounds out our conversation here, but for me, it's something that we talked about way in the beginning, is you and I were saying how someone that's an event marketer at a company in charge of trade shows and events, I mean, there's so much thrown at them. So just the pure planning is difficult. And if you don't understand it, if you don't know material handling, if you don't know, the contract, it can be confusing. So you have planning, you have the production, you have to work with, a team like my company or others. And, you're worried about the furniture, you're worried about the build, you're worried about the graphics, how it comes out. Right. And then lead into staffing, outreach, marketing, partner outreach, PR analyst strategy, engagement, lead collection, post-show follow, all these strategies and things that go in there. So I think one point that I want to make at the end of this is find resources, right? If you are that event marketer, right, you need to be asking those questions to your stakeholders and then saying, hey, if we want to do this right, this $500,000 that you're putting in my lap, or 300,000, whatever it is, it's a big spend, right? I need the resources. And I just want people to know there are resources out there. You should be asking more of a company like mine than just to build your trade show booth. You should be asking them more about strategy, right? About engagement, about lead collection. They can connect you if they are not capable with people that can, right? Like I would be somebody that could connect you with Nicola, right? If you needed some of the things that she does. So ask, there's resources, because this is what it takes. I think these are the things that it takes.
So true. And one other thing I would add is it is not the event marketer's responsibility alone within an organization.
It can feel like it's amazing. It can feel like
it. Be really one of my strong recommendations is create very clear roles and responsibilities up front. What do you do? What is the partner marketing organization's responsibility? What is the PR and analyst team's responsibilities? What is the field marketing team's responsibilities? Those are all part of your organization, and you shouldn't be doing this in isolation, because if you do, you will fail.
And I think some companies, it's what you're saying, will have those departments and they need to know what to ask of them. They need to know what they need to be getting from them. And then some will not have those departments. And that's where they need to go get resources. That's where they need to be able to say, hey, these are things that we need to execute no matter what. Nicola, so where do people find you? Where can they connect with you? Where can they, get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my website is nicolakastner.com, so kind of easy. And also LinkedIn is probably the best platform. I am not that active on Instagram, or keep that and Facebook sort of separate, but definitely LinkedIn. Please say that you heard me on here, or put a note in there. I get a lot of people that are reaching out to try and sell me stuff. And if they don't put a note into LinkedIn to say, hey, saw you on the podcast or whatever, I often will decline. So please put something in there so I know that you're not somebody trying to sell me something.
That's great. And Ish is putting the links in the chat, right? So if you do want to get a hold of Nicola, you can see in the chat, she has the links. We're on that hour. I like to keep it to an hour best I can. I do want to thank everybody. As always, thanks for spending an hour. Thanks for coming to listen to this conversation. Hope it drove value. Hope it, something you can take things away and then go execute on your side. We have the end of our summer tour, I think, over the next 2 weeks, and then we're going to kick up a fall tour, which I'm really excited about. Fall tour, we're going to have some panel discussions. One will be about sustainability. We have some really cool people with there. Another panel discussion we're going to have in the fall is with 3 head of global event marketing for company, bring them in and kind of have a full discussion, hearing from them themselves. And then we have a bunch of shows coming up. So hope to see you all there. Nicola, this was great. It's awesome discussion. I love the work that you do and driving that narrative, driving that conversation with companies that are exhibiting and running their events. I think it's extremely valuable work, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Awesome. Bye, everybody. Thanks for showing up, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.